remember the feeling of fire in my veins, not the pathetic warmth that now keeps this frail body alive, but true fire, the kind that could melt stone and turn warriors to ash with a single breath. The mountains trembled when I soared above them. My shadow would fall across villages, and I would hear the screams even before I descended. They called me Zarthagos, scourge of the north, terror of the frost peaks. Now they call me nothing at all. The few who speak to me call me old man, hermit, beggar, if they only knew what I once was. 5 centuries I ruled the northern mountains, 5 centuries of tribute and terror, of amassing a hoard so vast that its glow lit the deepest chambers of my lair like daylight. Gold was my bedding, gems my sustenance for the soul. I would sleep atop mountains of wealth, the cold metal warming beneath my scaled belly. I dreamt of conquest and flame, and when I woke, I made those dreams real. What use is a dragon without a hoard? What meaning has life without the weight of treasure beneath your claws? I cannot pinpoint the exact moment my doom began. Perhaps it was when I raised the Tower of Kalimar, the wizard who dared build his home too close to my hunting grounds. Perhaps it was earlier, when I first felt that insatiable hunger for more gold, more jewels, more, always more. The elders of my kind warned against such greed. Even dragons must know the bounds of their desire. My mother once told me as she taught me to fly. I did not listen. Dragons are meant to covet, to possess. It is our nature. Or so I believed. I remember the day of my fall with perfect clarity. The sun hung high in a cloudless sky as I returned from burning a caravan that dared traverse my territory without offering tribute. My maw was still warm with flame, my nostrils filled with the scent of charred flesh and wood. I circled my mountain 3 times, as was my habit, surveying my domain before descending into my lair through a vertical shaft known only to me. The familiar comfort of my hoard awaited me. Mountains of gold coins, heaps of jewels, armor and weapons forged by the greatest smiths of a dozen realms, artifacts of power whose origins were lost to time, books whose knowledge had died with their authors. All mine, all testament to my power, my right to rule. And standing atop my treasure, waiting for me, was an old man, Kalimar. His robes were scorched, his beard singed, his skin blistered from my earlier attack. He should have been dead among the ruins of his tower, yet there he stood, one hand clutching a staff that gleamed with arcane sigils, the other holding a small wooden box. "Greetings, great Zarthagos," he said, his voice surprisingly strong for one so gravely injured. "I have come to offer you a gift." I laughed then, the sound reverberating through my lair, causing loose coins to cascade down the piles of treasure. "You offer me a gift? You, who stand at the threshold of death. What could you possibly possess that I would want?" "Immortality," he replied simply. "True immortality. Even dragons die eventually. We live for millennia, yes, but time claims us all in the end." The prospect of evading that final fate intrigued me, though I was cautious. Wizards are known for their trickery. "Speak your piece, human, before I finish what I started at your tower," Kalimar said, gesturing to my hoard with his staff. "You measure your worth by what you possess, but what good is treasure to the dead? What I offer is a way to bind your life force to your hoard. So long as a single coin remains, you cannot truly die. I should have killed him then. I should have unleashed my flame and reduced him to ash. Instead, I listened. Pride and greed, the twin flaws of dragonkind, stayed my claw. "And what do you ask in return for this boon?" I demanded. "For no wizard gives something for nothing. Nothing you would miss," he replied with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Simply a scale. One scale from your mighty hide, freely given. A scale, such a small price for eternity. I should have known better. All magic demands sacrifice. And the greater the magic, the greater the cost. But dragons are not known for their humility. We do not question our superiority, our invincibility. And that was my undoing. I plucked a single crimson scale from my chest, where they were smallest, and dropped it before him. Your gift, wizard. Now fulfill your promise. Kalimar opened the wooden box. Inside was a dagger, its blade black as night, its hilt wrapped in what I now know was the hide of another dragon. Before I could react, he plunged the dagger into my scale. Pain erupted through my entire being, as if every scale had been torn from my body at once. "Fool," Kalimar wheezed, blood trickling from his mouth as the last of his life force powered his spell. "Did you think I came to grant you a boon? You destroyed everything I built, everything I loved. My vengeance is this. Your life is now bound not to your hoard, but from it. Every treasure you touch will turn to ash. Every piece of gold will burn you like the fires of the 9 hells. Your greed will be your prison, and only when you learn the worth of what cannot be hoarded will you find release." The wizard collapsed then, his body disintegrating into dust that settled among my coins. I roared in fury and denial, unleashing flame that melted gold into rivers that flowed between the cracks of the stone floor. But it was too late. The curse had taken hold. I lurched forward, intending to flee my lair until I could determine how to break this curse. But as my claws touched my treasure, agony, unlike anything I had ever known, seared through me. Where once the touch of gold had brought pleasure, now it brought only pain. Each coin, each gem, each precious thing burned like divine fire against my scales. I tried to take flight, to escape, but my wings would not respond. My body felt wrong, alien. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a polished shield nearby, and saw not the terrible visage of Zarthagos, but the face of an old human man, withered and afraid. The transformation was complete. The mighty red dragon was gone, imprisoned in weak human flesh. And all around me, my glorious hoard began to crumble, coins turning to ash, gems becoming dull stone, magical artifacts losing their gleam and power. I reached out in desperation to save what I could, but each touch only hastened the destruction. Within moments, centuries of accumulated wealth had become nothing but dust and worthless rock. I wept then, human tears falling from human eyes. Not for the loss of my dragon form, though that pain would come later. No, I wept for my treasure, for without it, what was I? A dragon is defined by his hoard. Without it, I was nothing. I wandered from my lair that day into a world that no longer cowered at my approach. The journey down the mountain that had once taken moments on mighty wings now required days of painful hiking on human feet unused to walking. The cold that I had never noticed as a dragon bit into my human bones. Hunger, real hunger for food rather than the mere desire for wealth, gnawed at my stomach. I sought shelter in a small cave as a snowstorm descended upon the mountains. Huddled against the stone, shivering, I confronted the full reality of my situation. I was mortal, vulnerable, the mighty Zarthagos, reduced to hiding from the elements like the weakest of creatures. And yet, even in my despair, there was a small voice in the back of my mind whispering, "Find treasure, rebuild your hoard, become mighty again." The curse did not remove my draconic desires, only my ability to fulfill them. My dreams that night were of gold, of swimming through coins like water, of jewels sliding between my claws. I woke to find my hands outstretched, grasping at phantom riches, finding only cold air. Days became weeks, weeks became months. I learned to survive in this frail form. I learned to hunt small game, to gather berries and roots, to build shelters against the weather. Skills no dragon should ever need to know became essential to my continued existence. The humiliation of it burned worse than any knight's lance ever had. My first encounter with humans after my transformation came when I stumbled upon a logging camp at the base of the mountains. I had been drawn by the smoke from their fires, by the smell of cooking meat. My plan, such as it was, had been to steal food and continue on my way. But as I crept closer, I was spotted by a young woman carrying a pail of water from a nearby stream. She did not scream or run. Instead, she looked at me with pity. "Are you lost, grandfather?" she asked, using a term of respect for the elderly that made me want to breathe fire in outrage. But no flame came, only a hacking cough from lungs weakened by age and cold. "I seek food," I managed to say, my voice rough from disuse. Speaking, the common tongue felt strange. As a dragon, I had understood it, but rarely deigned to use it. Dragon speech was for dragons. After all, the languages of lesser beings were beneath me. Now I had no choice. "Come," she said, gesturing for me to follow. "We have stew. You look half-starved." Pride warred with hunger. Pride lost. I followed her to the camp, where I was given a bowl of stew and a place by the fire. The loggers asked few questions, assuming I was simply an old hermit, caught unprepared by the early winter. They spoke around me of their work, their families, their plans. I listened in silence, marveling at the simple concerns that occupied their minds. No thoughts of conquest or hordes, just the mundane business of living. When they offered me a small pouch of coins in exchange for helping to mend their tools, a skill I apparently possessed in this body, though I had no memory of learning it, I reached for it without thinking. The moment my fingers touched the leather, pain shot up my arm. Inside were copper and silver pieces. Meager wealth by draconic standards, but treasure nonetheless. The curse remained. I declined as graciously as my shock would allow, and asked instead for food and a blanket. These they gave freely, with no expectation of repayment. This concept, charity without transaction, was foreign to me. Dragons do not give, they take. They do not share, they hoard. I did not understand it then. Part of me still does not. I left the camp the next morning, continuing my aimless wandering. But the encounter had changed something within me. For the first time, I began to consider that there might be aspects to these short-lived beings that I had overlooked in my centuries of viewing them only as sources of tribute or meals. This realization did not come easily or quickly. Old habits of thought do not die simply because the body that houses them has changed. I still dreamed of gold. I still found my eyes drawn to the jewelry worn by travelers I encountered on the roads. I still felt the urge to take, to possess, to hoard. But each time I succumbed to that urge, the curse reminded me of its presence with searing pain. Once, I managed to steal a golden ring from a merchant while he slept at an inn where I had taken work as a stable hand. I had planned carefully, moving with a stealth that surprised me in this clumsy human form. The moment my fingers closed around the ring, triumph surged through me, followed immediately by agony as my flesh blistered and smoked. I dropped the ring with a cry that woke the merchant. Only the darkness and his confusion saved me from being caught. The next morning, my palm bore a perfect circular burn, a brand of my shame. Years passed in this manner. I drifted from village to village, town to town, taking work where I could find it, always moving on before anyone could grow too curious about the old man who flinched away from coins and coveted beautiful things with his eyes but never his hands. I learned to use different names, to invent histories for myself. I became adept at lying, at pretending to be human. Sometimes I almost believed it myself. But at night, the dreams would come. Dreams of soaring above the mountains, of the weight of treasure beneath me, of the fear in the eyes of those who beheld me in my true form. I would wake, gasping, phantom wings twitching against my back, reaching for a hoard that was not there. And in those moments between sleep and wakefulness, I would remember who I truly was, what I truly was. A decade into my curse, I found myself drawn back to the mountains of my former domain. I told myself it was mere curiosity, a desire to see what had become of my territory in my absence. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was searching for a way home, for a way to reclaim what was mine. The journey was harder than I remembered. My aged human body struggling with slopes that my draconic form had navigated with ease. When I finally reached the hidden entrance to my lair, I found it collapsed. Whether from natural causes or deliberate action, I could not tell. I spent days clearing a path, my hands bleeding from the rough stone, my back aching from labor no dragon was ever meant to perform. When I finally broke through into the vast cavern that had housed my hoard, I found it changed beyond recognition. The great chamber where mountains of gold had once gleamed in the darkness was now bare stone, covered in a fine layer of ash. All that remained of my centuries of accumulation was dust. I fell to my knees in the center of the chamber, running my fingers through the ash, feeling no pain this time, for it was no longer treasure, merely the memory of it. And then I noticed something glittering in the dim light that filtered through cracks in the ceiling. Half buried in the ash was a single gold coin, somehow spared from the destruction of my hoard. With trembling fingers, I reached for it, expecting the familiar burn of the curse. Instead, I touched cold metal. No, pain came. Confused, I picked up the coin, turning it over in my palm. It was an ancient piece, its markings worn nearly smooth with age. I did not recognize it as part of my hoard, though it could have easily been one coin among countless thousands. As I studied it, realization dawned. This coin had not been part of my hoard when Kalimar cast his curse. It had come later, perhaps dropped by some adventurer who had found a way into my abandoned lair in search of overlooked treasure. It was not mine, had never been mine, and so the curse did not affect it. I should have left it there. I should have seen it as a sign that my draconic avarice could never be satisfied, that the curse would follow me even here. Instead, I saw opportunity. If newly acquired treasure did not trigger the curse, perhaps I could rebuild my hoard one piece at a time. Perhaps I could reclaim some small measure of what I had lost. I left my lair with the coin secured in a pouch tied around my neck, hidden beneath my ragged clothes. It became my talisman, my secret. At night, I would take it out and let it catch the firelight, watching it gleam. The familiar pleasure of possession returned, muted by my human senses but recognizable nonetheless. The dragon within me stirred. My wandering took on new purpose. I began to seek out opportunities to acquire wealth, small amounts that would not be missed. A coin from an offering plate at a temple, a silver goblet from a noble's table where I served as a temporary cook, a gem prized loose from its setting in a piece of jewelry I was asked to repair. Never enough to be noticed, but each item carefully chosen, each theft meticulously planned. I created a new lair of sorts, a small cave high in the mountains where few humans ventured. There, I kept my slowly growing collection. It was nothing compared to my former glory, barely enough to cover the floor of a single small chamber, but it was mine. Each piece I acquired strengthened the dragon within, reminded me of who I truly was beneath this human disguise. But the curse had not been broken, merely circumvented. I discovered this when, returning to my new lair after a successful theft of a pearl necklace from a merchant's wife, I found the entrance disturbed. Someone had found my secret. Panic seized me, followed by rage at the thought of my treasures in the hands of another. I rushed inside to find a young man, barely more than a boy, stuffing my hard-won trinkets into a sack. "Thief," I snarled, the word rich with irony I did not recognize in my anger. The boy startled, dropping the sack, scattering coins across the stone floor. His face, illuminated by the lantern he had brought, showed fear, but also determination. "My sister is sick," he said, his voice cracking. "The healer in the village demands payment we cannot afford." I thought, perhaps just enough for the healer. His words meant nothing to me. All I saw was someone taking what was mine. The dragon within, suppressed for so long, roared to the surface. I lunged at him, my aged body moving with a speed and strength I did not know it possessed. My hands, gnarled with age and hard work, closed around his throat. I growled, my voice deepening, taking on the resonance it had possessed when I was Zarthagos the Mighty. "You dare steal from a dragon?" The boy's eyes widened in confusion and terror. He could not understand my words, but he felt the inhuman strength in my grip, saw something ancient and terrible looking out through my human eyes. He struggled, kicking, clawing at my arms. In his flailing, his foot struck the small pile of treasure, sending it scattering across the cave. The moment the coins touched my skin, the curse reawakened. Agony surged through me, as if I had been plunged into a forge. I released the boy with a howl of pain, falling back, watching in horror as my small hoard began to crumble to ash wherever it touched me. The boy, seeing his opportunity, fled, leaving behind his sack and lantern. I lay there, surrounded by the ruins of my second hoard, the pain slowly subsiding but leaving a hollowness in its wake. The curse had not been fooled. It did not matter whether the treasure was from my original hoard or acquired afterward. Once I claimed it as mine, once the dragon within exerted its possessive nature, the curse recognized its true target. That night, huddled in my now empty cave, I confronted a truth I had been avoiding since my transformation. The curse was not upon my body, but upon my soul. Kalimar had not merely changed my form, he had bound my draconic nature itself. So long as I thought as a dragon, desired as a dragon, I would be denied the very thing that defined me. The physical transformation was merely a symbol of a deeper imprisonment. The realization brought no comfort, no path to freedom. If anything, it made my situation more hopeless. How does one change the nature of one's soul? How does a dragon learn not to covet, not to hoard? It would be like asking the sun not to shine, the river not to flow. It was my essence, the core of my being. Yet as the years continued to pass, as this human body aged and weakened further, I began to notice changes within myself. Subtle at first, then more pronounced. The dreams of gold and flame came less frequently. The instinctive assessment of value when I saw a beautiful object became less immediate. The desire to possess, while never gone entirely, dulled like an old blade left too long without sharpening. I found myself noticing other things instead. The way sunlight filtered through autumn leaves, turning them to stained glass. The complex melody of a mountain stream over stone. The smell of pine after rain. These things had always existed in my world but had been deemed unworthy of a dragon's attention. Now, with no hoard to tend, no territory to defend, they filled the void left by my lost obsessions. I began to spend time in human settlements, not to scout for valuables to steal, but to observe the beings I had once seen only as prey or tribute bearers. I watched mothers with their children, craftsmen at their work, elders telling tales by the fire. I saw the connections between them, the invisible bonds of love and duty, and shared experience that I had never understood or valued. In the village of North Pass, high in the mountains where I had once ruled, I took up residence in an abandoned hunter's cabin on the outskirts. The villagers were wary of me at first. This strange old man who appeared from nowhere, who flinched at the sight of gold, who sometimes stared at the sky with such longing it made them uncomfortable. But over time, they accepted my presence. I mended tools, carved toys for the children, listened to the troubles of those who sought out the wise hermit for advice. The irony did not escape me. I, who had once demanded tribute from these same mountains on pain of fiery death, now served their inhabitants with my hands and what wisdom my centuries had granted me. I, who had once hoarded wealth, now lived with only what I needed to survive. I, who had terrorized, now healed in what small ways I could. It was in North Pass that I met Elara, a child who would change the course of my cursed existence. She was 8 winters old when she first appeared at my cabin door, a serious little thing with eyes that reminded me, in color, if not ferocity, of my own draconic gaze. She brought a wooden doll with a broken arm, looking up at me with solemn expectation. "Mother says you fix things," she said, holding out the doll. I took it carefully, noting the clean break in the jointed limb. "I can mend this," I told her, "but why come all this way alone? The path is not safe for little ones." "I am not afraid," she replied with the perfect confidence of childhood, "and you will not hurt me. How can you be so certain of that?" I asked, curious despite myself. Children usually avoided me, sensing perhaps some echo of my true nature. "Because your eyes are sad," she said simply. "Dangerous things do not have sad eyes, they have hungry ones." Her words struck me like a physical blow. This child, this human hatchling, had seen through me in a way no one else had in all my years of hiding. Not to my draconic nature, but to the sorrow that had become its shadow. I repaired her doll in silence, and when I returned it, I found myself asking, "Will you come again?" She did come again, bringing small broken things for me to mend, then staying to ask questions that no adult would dare pose. Why did I live alone? Why did I never go to the temple? Why did I look at birds with such strange longing? I answered as truthfully as I could without revealing my true nature, and in return, she told me of her life in the village, her dreams, her fears. Through Elara's eyes, I began to see humanity not as a lesser species, but as one with its own kind of magic, the capacity for growth, for change, for seeing beauty in the impermanent. Dragons live for millennia, our personalities as fixed as our territories, our habits becoming more entrenched with each passing century. Humans, with their brief spans, must constantly adapt, constantly learn. They have no time for the stagnation that often afflicts my kind. One spring day, as Elara and I sat by a stream watching the snow melt rush past, she asked me a question I had never considered. What do you want most in the world? Once, the answer would have been immediate and unchanging. My horde, my true form, my power. But now, after decades of living among humans, after years of knowing this child, I found myself hesitating. "I want to remember who I was," I said finally, the truth slipping out before I could reconsider, while becoming someone I would not have recognized. Elara nodded, as if this made perfect sense, trailing her fingers in the cold water. "That is what growing up is," she said with the peculiar wisdom children sometimes possess. My mother says I am not the baby she held, but I am still her daughter. I looked at her in wonder. How is it that you understand so much with so few years? She shrugged. I listen. No one thinks children listen, but we do. In that moment, I realized that I had spent centuries not listening. Not to the humans I terrorized, certainly, but also not to the world around me. Not to the subtle rhythms of existence that had continued regardless of my presence. I had been so focused on accumulation, on dominance, that I had missed the knowledge that could not be hoarded, only experienced. As Elara grew from child to young woman, our conversations deepened. She was clever, curious about the world beyond the mountains. I found myself sharing knowledge I had gathered over my long life, teaching her to read the stars, to recognize plants and their uses, to understand the patterns of weather and wildlife. I never spoke of magic or dragons directly, but I gave her what wisdom I could, in forms she could accept. In return, she taught me what it meant to care for someone beyond myself, to worry for their safety, to take joy in their happiness, to feel pride in their accomplishments. These were emotions I had never experienced as Xarthagos. Dragons do not form attachments outside of occasional mating. We do not nurture, we do not mentor. Our young hatch self-sufficient, needing little from their parents beyond territory and the most basic instruction in survival. Yet here I was, an ancient worm in human form, watching over a human child as she navigated the perils of growing up. I found myself checking the path to the village after heavy rains to ensure it was safe for her journey. I gathered herbs to treat the cough that plagued her in winter. I carved her a set of wooden animals for her 16th birthday, taking care to make the dragon accurate in every detail, a small joke she would never fully understand. On her 18th birthday, Elara came to my cabin with news. She had been accepted as an apprentice to a renowned healer in a city far to the south. She would be leaving within the week. I felt a hollowness open within me at her words, a sense of loss I had not expected. This, I realized, was another aspect of humanity I had never valued. The pain of separation, the price of forming bonds that must inevitably be broken. I will write, she promised, taking my gnarled hands in her young ones, and I will return to visit when I can. You must go, I told her, forcing a smile. The world has much to teach you, far more than an old man in a mountain cabin. She hugged me then, an embrace I stiffly returned, unused even after all these years. To such physical expressions of affection. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me. After she left, the cabin seemed emptier than it ever had before. I found myself talking aloud as if she was still there to hear, catching myself halfway through explaining the meaning of a bird's call or the reason thunder follows lightning. The silence that answered me was more isolating than any I had experienced in my solitary draconic existence. Her letters came regularly at first, full of descriptions of the city, her studies, the people she was meeting. I read them by firelight, savoring each word, proud of her discoveries and growth even as I missed her presence. Gradually, the letters became less frequent, shorter. She was busy with her training, making a place for herself in the world. It was as it should be. 3 years after her departure, as autumn painted the mountains in reds and golds that reminded me painfully of flame, a messenger from the village brought news instead of a letter. Elara had died, taken by a fever that had swept through the city. The same illness she had gone to help fight had claimed her in the end. I had witnessed countless deaths in my centuries as a dragon. I had caused more than I could remember. None had affected me as Kars. This one did. I retreated to my cabin and did not emerge for days. When I finally did, it was to walk to the highest peak I could reach in this frail body. to stand at the edge of a cliff and roar my grief to the sky. No flame came, no earth-shaking bellow, only the cracked cry of an old man's voice. Yet in that moment, I felt more dragon than I had in decades. That night, I dreamt not of gold, but of Alara. She stood before me in my lair as it had been before the curse, unafraid despite my true form towering over her. "You have been seen," she said, reaching out to touch my scaled snout with gentle fingers. "Now you must see yourself." I woke with tears on my face and a strange lightness in my chest. Something had changed within me. Some knot of draconic pride and resentment loosened by grief. For the first time since my transformation, I began to consider that perhaps the curse was not merely a punishment, but an opportunity, a chance to experience existence from another perspective, to learn what dragons in their arrogance and isolation never could. The winters grew colder, harder on my aging human body. I knew I did not have many years left in this form. The thought, which would once have filled me with rage and despair, now brought a certain peace. I had lived 2 lives, one as a mighty dragon spanning centuries, and one as a humble human measured in mere decades. Both had taught me, changed me. I began to put my affairs in order, such as they were. I had accumulated no wealth, no possessions of significance beyond the tools of my simple life, but I had knowledge, experiences, perspectives unique in all the world. I began to write, filling sheaves of parchment with observations and reflections, not the dry facts a scholar might record, but the lived understanding of one who had been both predator and prey, both immortal and ephemeral, both mighty and vulnerable. I wrote of the beauty of gold seen through draconic eyes, the way it sings to us beyond its mere physical properties. I wrote of the terror and exhilaration of flight, the feeling of wind beneath wings. I wrote of the crushing weight of centuries of memory, and the liberation of living fully in the present moment, as humans must. And I wrote of Kalimar's curse, recognizing it finally not as my doom but as my salvation. Without it, I would have continued as I was, accumulating treasure without purpose, destroying without thought, existing without living. The wizard in his dying vengeance had given me the one thing no dragon ever receives, the chance to change. As the last pages were filled, as the final words were written, I felt a strange sensation begin to spread through my body, a warmth that was not the feeble heat of human blood, but something older, more familiar. I looked down at my hands and saw the first scales beginning to form, crimson against my weathered skin. The curse was lifting. I stumbled from my cabin, hardly daring to believe what was happening. In the clearing outside, beneath a sky heavy with stars, the transformation accelerated. Human flesh gave way to scales, brittle bones strengthened and grew, limbs stretched and changed shape. The pain was excruciating but welcome. A birth rather than a death. I felt my consciousness expanding, draconic senses returning in a rush of perception that made me dizzy with its intensity. When it was complete, I stood in my true form once more, Xarthagos reborn. I spread wings that had existed only in dreams for decades, feeling the familiar weight and power of them. I drew breath into lungs large enough to create gales, feeling the ember of flame that had never truly died rekindle in my chest. I could have taken to the sky then, returned to my old ways of terror and domination. The mountains were still there, the villages ripe for conquest. I could have begun a new horde, built a new reputation of fear, but as I prepared to launch myself skyward, I caught sight of my cabin, the small garden I had tended, path that led down to the village where I had been, not a tyrant, but a neighbor, not a monster, but a friend. I remembered Alara's words. You have been seen. In my centuries as a dragon, I had been witnessed by countless beings, but always with fear, with awe, with the knowledge that I was other, separate, above. But Alara had seen me, the true me, beneath scales or human skin. She had seen my capacity for kindness, for growth, for connection, and in doing so, she had allowed me to see those things in myself. I took flight then, but not to reclaim old territories or establish new ones. I soared above the mountains I had once ruled, seeing them now with eyes that had learned to appreciate beauty beyond possession. The curse was broken not because I had learned humility as Kalimar had demanded, but because I had learned something far more valuable. I had learned to see worth in what could not be hoarded. Gold turns to ash eventually. Jewels lose their luster. Even dragons die. But the connections we forge, the growth we experience, the moments of genuine understanding between different souls, these are treasures that cannot be possessed or lost. They become part of us, changing us from within. I still fly these mountains, though I am careful not to be seen too clearly by human eyes. The legends have begun already. Tales of a crimson shadow against the moon, a guardian presence rather than a threat. Some say I am the spirit of a long-dead hero. Others claim I am a manifestation of the mountains themselves. A few, those who remember the old stories of Zarthagos the Terrible, whisper that I am him returned, though changed in some fundamental way they cannot quite articulate. Let them wonder. I have no need for their understanding, their tribute, or their fear. I have found a different kind of hoard, one that grows rather than diminishes when shared. Knowledge, experience, compassion, connection. A wealth that Kalimar in his vengeance could not have foreseen, that I, in my draconic arrogance, could never have valued. Sometimes, on nights when the stars are brightest, I land beside a small grave on a hillside overlooking the village of North Pass. There lies Alara, returned after death to the mountains she loved. I bring no gold, no jewels, only memories and gratitude. I tell her of my flights, of the wonders I have seen with eyes now capable of recognizing them, of the wisdom I continue to gather, not for myself alone, but to share when the right seeker appears. In those quiet moments, I feel the weight of both my lives, dragon and human, pressing upon me. The memories stretch back through centuries, some sharp as crystal, others faded like ancient tapestries. I remember the countless beings who died by my flame, the villages reduced to ash, the terror I spread like a shadow across the land. That guilt remains, a burden I will carry through whatever years remain to me. It is fitting, a counterweight to the freedom of my wings. Yet alongside that darkness, I hold the memories of an old man in a mountain cabin, of hands that learned to create rather than destroy, of a child's trust freely given and honored. I remember the taste of simple food shared with companions, the comfort of a fire on a winter night, the satisfaction of work done well for its own sake. These too are part of me now, woven into the fabric of my being as surely as the instinct to hoard or the power of flight. I am neither the dragon I was nor the man I became, but something new forged in the crucible of Kalimar's curse. The wizard intended my suffering to be eternal, my isolation complete. He could not have known that in stripping me of everything I valued, he would force me to discover value in things I had never considered. That in binding me to mortality, he would free me from the prison of unchanging draconic nature. There are other dragons in the world, ancient and terrible in their might. I encounter them sometimes in my wanderings, and they do not know what to make of me. They sense something different, wrong perhaps, in the way I carry myself. in the lack of territorial aggression, in my disinterest in their tales of hordes and conquest. I see in them what I once was, the magnificent emptiness of existence without growth or connection. I pity them as they once would have pitied me in my human form, and there is a certain symmetry in that which pleases me. The humans of these mountains have begun to leave offerings at the edge of the forest, not tribute extracted through fear, but gifts freely given. A hunter will leave the choicest portion of his kill. A weaver will hang a beautifully dyed cloth from a tree branch. A child will place a carefully drawn picture of a red dragon beneath a stone to keep it from blowing away. They do not do this out of terror, but from a growing sense that the shadow that sometimes passes overhead means them no harm, might even be watching over them in its own way. I accept these offerings as what they are, acknowledgements of mutual respect, and in return, I do what I can to protect this small corner of the world. When avalanches threaten the village in winter, my wings create winds to divert the snow. When bandits crossed the pass last autumn with ill intent, they found their path blocked by fallen trees and mysterious fires that drove them back the way they had come. When a child strayed too far into the forest as darkness fell, she found her way home by following a strange red light that danced just ahead of her until the village came into view. Small things, subtle interventions that preserve the mystery of what I am while honoring the responsibility I have chosen to accept. Not lordship, not ownership, but stewardship, a concept I would have dismissed as weakness in my previous life. I still dream of gold sometimes, the comfortable weight of it beneath me, the soft clink of coins shifting as I moved. I wake from such dreams not in anguish now, but with a quiet acknowledgement of what was and what is. The desire to hoard, to possess, to dominate, these things remain part of my nature. They are aspects of who I am, not the entirety of my being. In learning to live without my treasure, I found treasures of another kind. In losing my terrifying reputation, I discovered the quiet satisfaction of being valued for what I give rather than feared for what I might take. In accepting the limitations of mortality, I gained an appreciation for the preciousness of time that immortality had denied me. Is this wisdom? Perhaps. Or perhaps it is merely the perspective granted by experiencing life from two vastly different positions. The mighty see one world, the humble another, and few ever glimpse both. I do not claim greater understanding than other beings, only a unique vantage point from which to observe the complexities of existence. The sun is rising now, painting the peaks with light that reminds me of flame. Soon I will take wing and soar among the clouds, feeling the joy of flight that never diminishes, no matter how many centuries pass. Later, I may visit the lake where the village children swim in summer, watching unseen from the forest as they splash and play, their laughter carrying across the water. Or perhaps I will journey to distant mountains, seeking others of my kind who might be ready to hear what I have learned, though few ever are. Whatever path I choose, I carry with me the dual legacy of Zarthagos the Terrible and the nameless old man of North Pass, dragon and human, predator and healer, taker and giver. The curse that was meant to be my eternal punishment became instead the doorway to understanding I would never have found on my own. There is a human saying, Elara once shared with me, every curse is a blessing in disguise, and every blessing holds the seed of a curse. At the time, I nodded politely, unwilling to debate philosophy with a child. Now, with the weight of 2 lives upon my soul, I recognize the truth in those words. Nothing is purely one thing or another. Even a dragon can learn. Even a monster can change. The mountains will outlast me, as they outlast all things. The gold that once filled my lair has returned to dust, its gleam only a memory. The humans, whose ancestors feared my shadow, now tell stories of the Crimson Guardian who watches over the northern peaks. And I, who once measured my worth by the weight of my hoard, now find meaning in moments I would once have considered worthless. Perhaps that is the final lesson of my long existence. Worth is not inherent in the object or the moment, but in the eyes that perceive it, the soul that values it. My curse was to lose what I treasured most. My blessing was to discover treasures I never knew existed. And so I soar above the world that was once my hunting ground and is now my home in a truer sense than it ever was before. The sun warms my scales, the wind sings beneath my wings, and ahead lies a horizon filled with possibilities I am still learning to see. This too is wealth, of a kind Zarthagos the Terrible could never have comprehended. But I am no longer him. I am something new, born from the ashes of greed and the seeds of connection. I am the dragon who learned to live without gold, who discovered that the greatest treasures cannot be hoarded. And in that discovery, I found not the end of my story, but a beginning I never could have imagined.